everyone, welcome to Unmatched. Today we're talking about how AI generated content can significantly enhance brand storytelling. But there's a catch. Brands have to get clear about who they are and what their core message is, educate AI models on this over time, and ensure the output of AI generated data is distinctive and authentic. It's a topic I'm very passionate about, and who better than my guest today to speak about this? Oliver Yonchev is the CEO of FlightStory, one of the most disruptive marketing agencies sitting at the forefront of what's possible. Oliver, welcome to Unmatched.
I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So am I. And I have to say, I've loved your slogan since first seeing it. And I always wanted to ask you this. So, this is what better question to start the conversation? What is possible to achieve in marketing today?
It's really interesting. I would say probably the last decade, the being at the forefront is a philosophy that I believe leads to really great outcomes for marketeers, not just a personal passion. The reason I say that is most of my career has been spent in social media marketing, and you become very conditioned and you have a humility around not accepting the truth today. So, for example, when you're at the mercy of algorithms, the most effective thing that I could do today will probably change tomorrow. And that's really a conditioning and a culture you have to breed in marketing. So, keeping organizations at the forefront felt a worthy mission to pursue. My fundamental belief is that the most effective things or that you can do today, the outlier advantages you can find, they're usually not well understood. They're usually anchored to what may come next. There's maybe some new technology. There's maybe a societal change. There's maybe a way we change our communication. So it's a manifesto that I believe in, and I think it's a manifesto that any marketeer probably should adopt. And staying at the forefront is also fun. I will add that.
It is, and I have to say I agree with you. That's why seeing that fascinated me since the first moment, because everything is changing, everything is evolving, and we need to evolve with the times, and especially technology, which is the biggest disruptor that we have in our society today. How do you guys at Flight Story keep yourselves on top of everything that is happening in marketing and especially technology? And how do you guys use AI at Flight Story?
Yeah, big question. Difficult question to answer. It's not done easily. If I'll start from the foundational level. I think as an organization, as a group of people, we have to be incredibly curious, and we have to, as a business, show that we appreciate learning and experimentation. And that often starts with creating the space for people to share. So, one of the first group chats that we set up is called Ever Changing Landscape. And the whole intention is if something new happens, we should all be hearing about it, learning about it, debating it, commenting on it. And that was a foundation that we put early on in the organization to bond us around curiosity. The next thing then is we started to refine our values over time. And one of the core tenets that we have is we outfail the competition, meaning we experiment. And there's a whole host of things as an organization we have to do in order to show that we value experimentation and we don't value the outcomes as much. Although we love great outcomes, the process that we go on is really important to us. So I think at a foundational level, it's bringing together a group of people that are really curious, that want to learn. The next piece is having the values that bond you and lead you to be able to stay at the forefront. And they can be many things: curiosity, learning, experimentation. We have a few that we believe in, but there are many. And then the final piece, then, which goes, how do we integrate AI? We actually, I have a belief that great AI is invisible. And the problem with integrating AI into a company is people are putting the technology first and not the outcomes or the process. So the most impactful areas that we have seen is on an individual level, where individuals are now empowered in new ways to drive really interesting insights, to learn how to prompt correctly, that are now solving problems much quicker because they have access to this new technology. And I had this realization now that I almost seldomly default to Google anymore as my default engine. Most questions, for example, I was setting up a camera the other day. This is just a personal anecdote. I took a picture on ChatGPT and I said, "Can you tell me how to change these settings to optimize for a small room and record a podcast so it shows some depth?" And it told me the all the settings to change, and that was just from a picture. Understood the model.
Crazy.
So I go, that's just one really simple example on a personal level, the personal agency, where I think it's transformed many individuals on an organizational level. The second piece is in our creative suite. We are capable of doing things now in post production. We are able to all the kind of very specific things. Believe it or not, clients sometimes want to change things after they've signed them off. I know you
It
won't believe
doesn't
this.
ring a bell. It doesn't ring a bell
No,
at all. No,
not
I
at
don't know what you're
all.
talking about.
And in those scenarios, in a past life, that was a big headache, and it would cost a lot of money to maybe do a reshoot or something of that nature, or archive through B roll footage and redo an edit. It was very time consuming. Now, if someone wants a change, not even a nominal change, we can do voice synthesis, we can create avatars. You know, language is no longer a barrier for international businesses. The ability to low cost to truly transform. And there are some limitations, but those limitations are eroding over time. So I would say a huge amount in our post production. And then the third part is automations. So this is looking at systems and process and workflow, whether that's consumer, whether that's customer. That's everything from brief take all the way through to reporting. Where in our current systems can we create some automation workflows to create either new outcomes or do things at a lower cost? So there's a whole plethora of things, but what you will notice is I very seldomly talk about like AI in the work, because I don't believe, unless you are going for a world first and you want the earned attention and you're doing something novel for fame, which does add value if that's the goal, sure, integrate AI and put it integral and front and center of your work. But other than that, really it's a technology to augment and better what marketeers are capable of.
That's super interesting, and I will come back to this point in a second. But I want to not forget to ask you about something you just said, which is AI, or the best AI should be invisible. And I totally get it from a systems perspective, from a company perspective, agency perspective. But how about from a consumer perspective? I know there's a big debate right now about how transparent are we with the content that is generated with
Mm-hmm.
AI? And I've seen a lot of brands already putting out there a lot of stills, a lot of kind of images that you can immediately see that they're generated with AI. I haven't seen them specifically mentioning that those images are generated with AI. I'm wondering if this is becoming a thing where we need as brands to be transparent and
Mm-hmm.
let people know about this, a bit like, using filters on Instagram, or the whole beauty trend about letting consumers know of like what you've used on you as an influencer to show up the way that you
Mm.
do. What's your opinion on that?
I think it's a very complex, nuanced debate, and I'll explain a couple of reasons why. Number one, it comes down to definitions of AI. You know, almost all post production is leveraging AI technology in some way as a feature within a platform. So, does that fall under the definition of declaration or not? So, I think number one, we have to have some much tighter definitions of what we regard as AI generated? Is it part AI generated, which the majority of things are? Even if you took a picture on your, I don't know, your Google phone and then you picked the best image, that again is AI technology. So at a really simple level, it's not a straightforward yes or no answer until you create the guardrails and the definitions. The second piece then is, I think companies have a, there's three stakeholders in this you described. There's the consumer, there's the companies, and there's the platforms themselves. And you could argue regulators, governments, authorities, etc. If I look at that ecosystem, platforms themselves have an obligation, a legal obligation in certain territories, and legislation is being drafted up and passed through all the high courts across the world, that platforms now have an obligation to declare. And you will see if you post something on a meta platform, you have an option to say, was this AI generated? So they've put the optionality there, but they've put the onus back on the individual or the company. So again, I don't necessarily think that's the answer, but it's a starting place of accountability. But it's coming from a place of it's a legal obligation. The next piece then is, I think companies, great companies, tend to have their own policies around these things. They have their own values. They have their own set of ethics. Really good example was Dove. They came out and of the backdrop of AI generated, they stayed very true to their brand, which has been about celebrating real, and said, we won't use AI. And I think that's a perfect example of a brand staying true to its identity, its values, and using the context of new technology to insert themselves into the story in a really authentic way. So that's a really good example. More brands will need to create an AI policy, not just around the risks, the dangers, the governance of using and leveraging technology, but around their consumer ethics. So I think number one is definitions. We have to get some tighter definitions. Number two, it's a multi-stakeholder conversation to create safeguards. And I think a new world order and new legislation will have to be drafted, particularly from authorities like the ASA. I was a part of the influencer marketing scene. I was working in social media marketing before you had to declare anything. So, I've been part of these nascent movements that have impacted marketing in a really significant way, and seeing how, it did take some time to A, educate all the stakeholders, but B, put the legislation in place. And that evolves over time again once the frameworks are there. And then the third piece then is companies have and brands have a responsibility to ask these questions internally within their own walls to determine their policies and create. Every company needs an AI policy, like I'm sure every company had a social media policy at some point.
That's a fantastic point, and I will stick to that topic of identity and values. I think the example that you brought up with Dove is such a good one, right? Because it reflects a lot what they stand for,
Mhm.
and it's not something new. They've built this over time, right? So that positioning and that identity and that tone of voice keeps evolving, even with the use of AI or not the use of AI. They stay consistent to that. So
Mm.
I'm wondering at large, with especially bigger companies that have a heritage already. I think with smaller companies might be a little different, right? Because they're still in the phase
Mhm.
of building. But especially bigger companies that have a certain heritage, that have a certain history, how can they make that decision? Like what is it based on in the end? Because I feel we've touched upon a few things. One is efficiency, right?
Mhm.
Efficiency, cost efficiency, time efficiency. But then there's also how you show up in front of the consumer over time
Mhm.
and what that brand actually stands for.
Yeah, look, I think there are many answers to how brands should behave in the world. Whenever I'm asked a question about marketing and expected to give a binary answer or an absolute, my usual answer is it depends. You know
The
this.
best sentence in marketing, right?
Yeah, it depends, you
It
know.
depends.
Do you want sales? Do you want attention? Do you want, what's the goal? It depends on your customer. There's so many, everything is it depends. So I tend to think one of the challenges, and this is something I certainly on a personal level face, is when you have an appreciation and a fascination around new things, the shiny new toys, technology, it's a wonderful place to play. It can also be distracting. I think as marketeers, we have to remind ourselves our number one job is to service the customer and communicate with them in the most relevant way. And my response is AI will undoubtedly help you do that in so many ways, in ways that we haven't even discovered yet. However, the goal for every company is remain true to who you are and communicate your products, your services, your goods in the most relevant way based on whatever your goals are. So, look, I don't have a pointed, here's a set of rules or guidelines around how brands should think about this. But I would say that we have to remind ourselves that our core job is this thing. Technology is there to augment, support, to there's a friend I was speaking with, and he gave me this flippant comment about artificial intelligence needing a rebrand. And his view was it's such a bad word. There isn't anything in our world that is artificial that we warm to, that we're connected with. Think of artificial additives,
Yeah,
artificial friends. It's seen as fake. There is nothing great about fake. It's also quite intimidating when you combine this with the idea that it's a machine, it's clinical, it doesn't have empathy, it doesn't have feelings. So it creates this unhealthy relationships just by using the name artificial intelligence. And his recommendation was we have to call it co-intelligence because at
interesting.
a foundational level, it creates a healthier relationship. And that's exactly what it is there to do. And as marketeers, if we understand that it's there to augment, but the mission usually remains the same, then I think more people will have the right perspective to leverage the technology in an effective way.
I am going to adopt this new term like right now. I love
Start
it.
the movement.
We're
Start
going to
it
start the
now.
movement right now because the thing with this term also, co-intelligence, what I like about it is that it gives the idea that it takes it and me to make
Hmm.
something happen. Whereas as now I feel that a lot of marketers tend to think that because we have artificial intelligence, it's on it to come up with ideas and the research and everything. And, when you think about that, it's actually like teamwork.
Hmm.
I do the input and the tool does the output, right? That's where the collaboration comes from. I do agree it's a much better term. And I wish that we start this movement already because I also think we need a healthier relationship to it so that we understand the part that we need to develop. We still need to develop ourselves as marketers. And what is the part that we need to use from the tool?
Absolutely. And the healthy relationship is many things can be true at the same time. We can agree that there are unknown unknowns, there are risks. We can also agree that it is a profound opportunity for better. The technology itself is neither good nor bad. So, starting at a first principle level, which is definition, language, I believe, matters. We're both marketeers. We understand the power of language. And, I think all technology industries, particularly emerging tech, tend to have communication problems. So, I'm with you on the co-intelligence train.
I love it. I'm adopting it already. Let's talk about metrics. Metrics for AI generated content. I've seen some companies, and I will not name names, that have put KPIs on the amount of usage of AI generated content within their campaigns as a
Mm.
way to increase efficiency. And when I say generated by AI, I'm not saying edited by AI or
Mm.
fine tuned by AI, but literally, generating new content
Hmm.
with AI. And it sparked this question about how do we measure the impact or the efficiency, the value of a campaign that is generated with AI versus a regular one.
Yeah, well, in the context of if if a person has had to co-author and has taken the time to participate in a campaign and generate a new image or a new video, then that's probably a valuable metric. The challenge when you have one of the challenges by anchoring your success metrics to, you know, uh, what you're describing there is the thing about AI is it's limitless. And one of the things that we should all value is I think when things hit a certain scale, if I can go on and generate 1,000 images in 10 minutes, that doesn't make my affinity with your brand any more valuable. It doesn't change my relationship. So I think maybe there's value and merit in measuring AI metrics, how many people are participating. But whenever you come up with a measurement framework, I think you need to have some key indicator metrics. So you'll have the hardcore fundamentals, the sales, the clicks, the things that are easy to measure. You then need some leading indicator metrics. So these are metrics that show you're doing the right things, that may be a bit more qualitative led. And then the final thing, I'm a big believer in having like a single metric that is your North Star. The thing that like indicates that someone absolutely adores you, your fame metric, the thing that transcends a normal relationship with a customer or a consumer. I think they're always interesting to have. Like one I heard that I found really interesting was one brand, and I need to remember the brand. They basically they looked at how many people had tattooed their name on like a
I love
person,
that.
the most insane.
That's
Not
such a good
suggesting that's
metric.
yeah, I'm not suggesting that's like relevant for anyone probably not named Liquid Death or someone like that, but yeah, I just really like that kind of thinking in creative ways of what would indicate the utopia of the work and the fruits of a brand's labor.
And I love that because I call it the super fan metric. And,
Yes.
we talk about followers a lot, and then we talk about the next level community a lot. And I have started to speak a lot lately about super fans and the way that super fans have the ability to enhance brand loyalty and evolve brand loyalty over time. Because let's face it, I think the biggest challenge that especially bigger companies have versus smaller ones is that smaller ones are much closer to their communities and consumers. They understand on a much deeper level what those consumers want and need, and potentially because the companies might be younger in age, they're also closer to the consumer in that way. Whereas
Mm.
companies that are bigger have had bigger history over time and heritage, obviously are in a much different place in terms of structure, top management, ages, across all the different departments. You can't really avoid that. That's absolutely normal. So the gap in between, say, top management and consumers tend to be quite big. And so the question for me was always, how do you measure or how do you evolve and nurture brand loyalty in that way where, you know, a big company like Coca-Cola, for example, they speak to everyone, literally everyone. They're part of the culture. How do you measure, those super fans that would do anything for the brand? They would tattoo the Coca-Cola logo, or they would experience everything. They would buy every single piece of merch, or maybe Coca-Cola is not the best example, but you know what I mean. It's like, how do you nurture those people that would want to buy every single thing from you? Actually, I think, for example, Taylor Swift is a very good example,
Mm.
right? As a brand, she's been able to build a huge audience. I mean, millions and millions of people watch her, but she has also those amazing super fans that know everything about her,
Yeah.
go to every concert, experience everything. And so, how do you nurture those in the
I think
future?
I think you have to create spaces for them. So whenever you have a transactional relationship, I'll give you one example. One of the quickest wins, and I've advocated this for years, is in your social media calendar, how many big brands get people that show them love and they don't champion them or, recreate content around that message? That's a really quick win to show validation and actually encourage a behavior amongst people that like you, that may go on to love you because you've just given them a platform to your audience. So there's some really quick wins. If I take that a step further, some of the most fruitful spaces we've found are things like Telegram groups and Discords and places where you can get like minded people that maybe are bonded by a passion for you or your category or what it is you do, and over service them, listen to them, send them voice notes, allow them to participate in the brand in a way that others can't. I think if you create spaces for people, the fans will find you. The super fans will find you. If you don't have those spaces, I think it's going to be very difficult to say who falls into that category. Like, of course, it's somewhat easier if you were an e-commerce business and you could just pull a sales report and say who are our top 100 customers. I would imagine that and on that basis, very few e-commerce customers pull their top 100 spenders and like the founder send them a personal message of like, thank you so much. Write them a handwritten letter. Say, you know what, I'd love you to come down and see our operation and meet our team. You mean so much. What does that turn that person that really likes you, clearly into your products and services? How does that change their relationship? They feel part of what you're building. So there are so many ways to encourage, but it often starts with doing the hard thing, which is there's a lot of effort required to nurture real fandom.
I agree. And it's such a good point that you're making. And I think that the ROI of doing that is huge because people tend to think that, oh, I don't possibly have the time to speak to my audience one on one. But we forget that we live in a social media era where speaking to one person is speaking to millions and potentially billions at one point.
And imagine this is the bit that is incredibly hard to measure. And the scientists of marketing really struggle with this. Consider the vast majority of people online are silent. You will get no metrics. You will have no sentiment analysis of how they feel about you. It's very difficult to measure. Go a step further, and you have no visibility of how someone talks about you in a room when you're not there. And if you imagine you did something that no other brand is doing, you're the founder of a large organization and you're personally voice noting customers, can you imagine what they're saying behind your back and how they're advocating for you and how they'll probably then broadcast to all their people that exist? They'll broadcast to the 1,000 people. So in those singular interactions, it's almost impossible to measure the true impact. But it starts with caring and doing those types of things.
Yeah. And as you said, focusing on the not so much on the big numbers, but on the true engagement, right? Because that's where the magic happens. I recently launched a WhatsApp community.
Hmm.
And obviously, I have about like 200 people in there, brand marketers. One thing that I've noticed, discovered as well in the last few weeks, is that it's not just a place where you nurture your community and when you exchange with them, but I found also that it's a great place where you can learn a lot about the industry, where you
Hmm.
can, for example, get a lot of insights. So, in my opinion, I think that, nurturing the super fans is not just a way to give back to them, but it's a way for your business to keep developing and keep evolving. because asking questions and getting that feedback from those extremely loyal customers, I think, is invaluable, for the business.
We'll think of archetypes of customers. Historically, companies will try and box their customers around demographics. And now, more recently, people are bonded around maybe passions. And if you think of the cookieless world that we maybe are heading into, it's start stop all the time. People are looking for zero party data. They need to understand their customers and passions and interests outside of just product, name, demographics, the basics. If you go one step further and think about these spaces you can create, what you're describing here, having validation and having your business and having your decisions guided by those people is such a unique value add. We both know my colleague Pollyanna, and she's a big advocate for. She wrote an article about turning off your comments, you cowards, and how it's such a mistake for brands not to listen. I think it's such a mistake for anyone building anything to not listen to those spaces of your perfect customer, the archetype. Because if you want to scale more of those people and have an affinity with more people, you should always start there. So, yeah, I think what you're doing by cultivating an audience in a community, in spaces, and to your point, you can say you're doing it for them. It can be very self serving. The two things can coexist.
Yeah, because in the end, you're doing it for yourself, so you can give back to
Of
them
course.
eventually, right? So that's kind of the cycle. Um, Going back a little bit to marketing agencies, companies, marketing structures, and utilizing technology at large to improve on where we stand in terms of efficiency and everything like that. How do you envision marketing setups and structures evolving in the future? Because in my opinion, my observation is that I think the camps are going to be very divided in between the crazy thinkers, the creatives, the magicians, as I call them, and the data analysts. The guys who look into data and girls who look into
Mhm.
data and have a way to understanding what the data actually says, because it's not just, as we know, looking at the spreadsheet, it's also interpreting.
Mhm.
And that becomes a whole thing in the future, right? Or it's already there.
Mhm.
Prompt engineering, all those things that we need to develop. So I feel there's this human intelligence, creativity, crazy thinking, open ended camp. And then there's the more performance driven, data driven camp. Um, does that mean that we have to have different structures in order to accommodate? I don't necessarily feel 100% that the structures that we have in place right now are sort of, updated enough to what the world is actually, giving us in terms of technology and change and evolution.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something I think about a lot. Where are we headed? And what you're describing there is the archetype of the marketeer. We have left brain marketeers and right brain marketeers, generally speaking. Few unicorns that can do
Yeah.
both, but most fall into one of those two camps. If I think about the future for analytical brains in our industry, I would argue now that analytical brains are really well placed to take advantage because they already are structured in their thinking, critical thinking. They know how to interpret data, they know how to ask the right questions to get to the right answer. And now they are empowered with all these creative tools that can augment how they think and bring their ideas to life through video and image and sound and writing. So I would argue that if you're an analytical thinker, you will have many advantages going into the next stage. On the other side of the spectrum, if you're a creative, now you have an infinite amount of perspectives at your fingertips. One of the things that empowers creativity is perspective. The problem with being a person, a human, is we live in our own heads. And when you live in your own head, you have your own voice rattling around in there. And that doesn't breed creativity. What you need is multiple perspectives and multiple voices. And what AI allows us to do is have a perspective from anything we want. Any age, any person, any background, we can create those personas. So I actually think creatives also have advantages by embracing the technology. If I think at a more foundational level, I am conflicted about what will happen in the industry, and I'll speak on an agency perspective. I tend to view the world as there will be a divided world. I think mediocre agencies will disappear. Mediocre marketeers will really struggle. The reason I say that is, why would I pay a retained fee for a people based business when I can have a much lower cost subscription service that will basically do the same thing? On the other side of the spectrum, I think we will now, when good is scaled and there's just more good in the world, I think elite marketing, elite storytelling, creative that bonds us, that makes us feel something, I think those things will be more valuable in the future. I think large organizations will continue to have all the same problems they had, meaning they will be inflated, too many processes, too much governance, things that restrict them, decision fatigue. So they're going to need outside parties and voices to build them business cases and help them and support them to, deliver work that they want to do. So my view is the consultative end of marketing will, and the strategic end of marketing will continue to flourish at a high level. I think a lot of SME agencies and independents will find themselves in a difficult place. And then I tend to think the real rock stars will be, to your point, the magicians, the mad hatters, the out of the box thinkers, the person that is often neglected because they're a bit abrasive. And I think those
Hard to work
people
with.
can be hard to work with. I think those people will absolutely thrive in the new future. But that's one of the wonderful things about what I am reminded by. As much as I think the world could change a lot, particularly marketing, I don't necessarily think it will. Because there's a quote I love from Warren Buffett, and he said, AI might just change everything, every industry, every sector, every profession, apart from one thing: people. People don't change, the mistakes of the past, the inefficiencies that exist in society. I don't know if those things will change very quickly. So who knows where the future is taking us? But what I am very certain on is technology will play an increasingly larger role in the work that we do. The timeframes of that, who knows?
Yeah, such a good point. How do you look at marketers developing their skills for this future that we're talking about? That we don't know exactly how it's evolving, but we know that it's evolving, and we know that the way I see it, it's two things. One, entertainment. I
Hmm.
think entertainment is huge. You have to understand entertainment today in order to be in marketing, because
Hmm.
it's all about storytelling. It's all about putting the brand in front of consumers in a way that it's entertaining for them. And then the other big piece is technology, right? So
Hmm.
those things, in my view, they merge together in a way that they've never done before. Or if they did, it was a very high level for a very selected few in the past, right? But now everyone has access to that, and everyone needs to get better at that. How
Hmm.
do they do that?
The big question. I think it comes down to philosophy and values. I think marketeers will have to have humility and learn humility. And if you've worked in a sector that already changes very quickly, social media marketeers are really well placed.
Very humble
Yeah, they have
industry.
to be. You're humbled by complaints, by customers, by everybody telling you how to do your job. You are humbled by everyone. The algorithms humble you daily. So, yeah, the humility is an important factor. The next, I just think, is critical thinking. We have some behaviors that the environment has conditioned in us that we need to change. I'll give you one really simple example: search. If you think of how we find things on the internet and how we discover new information, it's largely through search. And how we have evolved through search is crude keywords. I want to find a restaurant in London that does Mexican food. I will type in the best Mexican restaurant in London, and I'll spell it incorrectly, and I would be then given a set of choices, and I go on a discovery then to pick, and I maybe do some validation through reviews, I look at pictures, etc., etc. Fast forward into a more a world where you remove discovery. I ask questions and get answers. We have to learn to ask the right questions. We have to speak in a way that's very specific. We have to learn how to do follow ups. So I think the skills of critical thinking are going to continue. They are important today, but I think they'll be even more important to know what to ask. The third skill, and this is one I think about a lot, that I don't know if you can teach, and I've tried to understand, where does it come from? Taste making. Knowing what good is. One of the most underrated skills in marketing is taste making. You kind of just hear the idea and know that's the one intuitively. And when we say intuition, we all always talk about backing things by data. We shouldn't use anecdotes. We need to use research. In part, yes, but if you think intuition usually is data, it's based on a set of experience and learnings and observations and validation through things going right. So you shouldn't underestimate the gut. And people that have great taste, that know how to pair things, that just know what great is, I think that skill is important. How you nurture that, I think you just have to learn a lot of stuff about lots of things. A good example is, like, think of one of the most iconic, greatest companies that's ever been created, Apple. Why Apple won in technology in their own way, and in many ways, was a level of discipline around their business model, but their appreciation for design and user experience and simplicity and white space and all of these things, that understanding, that came from a founder that studied typography and studied design. So you go, okay, well, in the future, tastemakers, people that know what great is, that know what people want before anyone tells them they need it, I think that's a skill that will be increasingly valuable. And then the final piece then is people that know how to create really effective mental models. So I very briefly touched on automation. Automation is this fascinating subsect of AI. And right now, automation isn't new to marketeers. If you have a website, you probably capture data and it goes into a CRM and you might get an auto response. There's a lot of automation built into customer workflow right now. But imagine a world where we're combining automation with generative capabilities, personalized videos at scale and sound, and not just text. But imagine how you could create these amazing customer experiences. But it starts from being able to create really structured, effective mental models. So I think people that think in those ways and can structure their thought process and operators will have many advantages in this new age. So there are so many things that I could touch on. And my overriding principle is always curiosity. I think right now we have this arbitrage of technology where for 2 years, if you just obsess over these things, if you just have the humility to try them, to play with them, don't form an opinion based on what someone else says. Go on to these tools, go on to Leap, go on to Zapier, go on to Make, build yourself an automation. Obsess over ChatGPT, over silly things, over important things. Figure out what perplexity is. Build a custom GPT. Play on Mid Journey, even if you're not a designer. Look at Runway. Like all of these things, I think if you just test, you will have so many advantages in the world in the next 2 years. And anyone can do that. Anyone. There are
Yeah.
no limitations right now to being able to do that, only mindset.
That's great, and also the barrier to entry is so low. It's
Yes.
barely you can do this for free, which is amazing. And I would add maybe just one thing apart from curiosity: don't just focus on your industry, on your
Mm,
vertical. I see so many marketers just looking at their own industry, whether it's beauty, fashion, sports, whatever. Look outside. There's other very good marketers in other
mm,
industries that do amazing things. Like look at Liquid Death. We talk about that. We talk
mm,
about them all the time. What inspiration can you get from there? Or look into authors or
mm.
speakers, or literally broaden your understanding of the world beyond the vertical that you operate in, because I think that that's when really you can understand and then connect the dots, right? You can never
I,
connect the dots in the present. You can only connect the dots in hindsight. But in order to connect the dots with this critical thinking that you talked about, and come up with something new that doesn't exist, it means that you need to know a lot about a lot of things,
I
right?
couldn't agree more. One of my, if we say one of the greatest marketeers of this generation, Mr. Beast, undoubtedly, as a creator. Creators are marketeers, and they're phenomenal marketeers and often underappreciated for their acumen. Mr. Beast talked about for him to unlock his potential, he had to learn about some obscure flower that exists in Japan. He had to learn about, random aviation facts, for him to be able to create these very unique experiences and storylines. It stems from just like relentless curiosity and going outside of your domain. And that's how you can truly. I'm a big believer that more marketeers need to read like nonfiction. Yeah, sorry, like need to read fiction. I think it's really important to like
Imagination.
understand great storytelling. And yeah, I everything you said there, I absolutely adore that. I love that.
One last question for you. What are you most excited about what's coming in the world of marketing and technology? Personally, what are you most excited about?
I am most excited now that people of all ages are no longer bound by technical limitations. If you think of the last technological renaissance, it was gate kept by people that understood a language that very few do: code, developers, people that built the technology that we use. We are moving into an era where the technology works for us. And if you have a great idea, the friction between you bringing that idea to life has been removed almost entirely. Not entirely, but it's getting close, and it's only headed in one direction. And what is the outcome of that? I think we will see an explosion of great minds, great thinkers, great ideas coming to market and coming in the world. And I think that's a wonderful thing for the industry. So that's probably what I'm most excited by.
Love it. Oliver, thank you so much for being on the pod. And I'm looking forward to speaking to you soon.
Likewise, and I love your new setup. And I always get very, it's fuel to me when we have our conversations. I love speaking with you. So
Thank you
thank you
so
for having
much.
me.
Take care.
Bye bye.